Hey everybody, I'm going to take some time to go over the PowerPoint on introductions and thesis statements and the handout on thesis statements. Um, so when you guys looked over the PowerPoint on introductions and thesis statements, an introduction should accomplish several things, one of which is to state your main point. In other words, your introduction needs a thesis statement, right? We're going to come back to the other elements of an introduction in a later video. But first, I want to focus on the thesis statement. Even though it's typically the last part of your introduction, it is the part that the whole essay hinges on, basically. It is such an important element, not only of the introduction, but for the essay as a whole. So we're going to focus on the thesis statements first, and then we'll go back in our PowerPoint and handout and video lesson in just a little bit and cover all the other elements of an introduction. So the PowerPoint on intros and thesis statements, it mentions that a thesis statement is not an emotional rant, but rather it's a powerful sentence in your introductory paragraph that communicates your viewpoint, sets the tone for the whole essay, and determines the organization of your essay, right? So that certainly sounds like it's an important element of your essay. So let's take a closer look at exactly what a thesis statement is and how to identify a thesis statement, good and bad ones, and then a little bit of work on how to create your thesis statements, right? So I'm going to focus on the handout for thesis statements. So when you're looking over that handout, you'll notice that the first page of it is just a list of everything that a thesis statement is and contains. So the first thing it says is that your thesis statement is a complete sentence, not the title of your essay. It is a sentence, and it is a sentence within your introductory paragraph, right? It's not a sentence up at the top by itself, and then you start your introduction. It is a part of the introductory paragraph. The second thing it says is the thesis statement passes the well done test. In other words, you need to make sure that you're not trying to create a thesis statement that's simply stating a fact, right? But even more than that, you want to make sure that your thesis statement, even if it sounds like it's something that could be debated, you want to make sure that it actually would be debated. And we're going to see some examples of how that works here in a little bit. The thesis statement does appear at the beginning of your paper, and it lets your reader know what direction you're taking the essay in. So it gives your reader a lot of information in just one sentence. It's so crucial. It lets your introduction function like a funnel, right? Or like an upside down pyramid. So if you think of that shape, everything up here at the top, at the beginning of your introduction is very general, right? And then as you move down into the middle of the funnel, you start to get a little more specific, right? A little more focused. And then when you get down to that point, or the very bottom, that's where you are at your most focused in the introduction. That is typically where the thesis statement appears. It's not a rule that it has to be the last sentence of your introduction, but like 90% of the time, that's probably where you'll find them. You want to make sure that you don't announce your thesis. You don't want to say things like, the thesis of this essay is blah, 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 or the purpose of this essay is blah, blah, blah. I intend to prove, or in this paper, I will discuss. You want your thesis statement to come very naturally and organically out of the rest of your introduction. When we take a look at some sample introductions and look for the thesis statements, you'll see that it's just a natural part of the intro. It's not an announcement, right? The next point that it makes on the handout is that your thesis statement acts as an umbrella, that it contains all the elements of your essay. What I mean by that is it not only states your main point for the essay, but a really good thesis statement will also mention the main points of the essay, right? So let's just say, like, your typical essay, you have your thesis statement and you're going to have 3 main points that you're going to discuss in the body of the essay. Those 3 main points would be included in the thesis statement. So that means you are letting your reader know what the body of the essay is going to contain, right? At least in a general sense. Another thing about your thesis statements is that they need to be precise. So on the handout, you'll see a thesis statement that's taken through a series of revisions. And the revisions are being done so that we can get that thesis statement as precise and focused as possible. So the original version of the thesis statement says Batman's personality is more complex than Superman's. Okay, well, I mean, that's letting our reader know the general subject of the essay, right? Batman versus Superman. It's somewhat letting us know what your viewpoint is, that Batman's more complex than Superman. And I would think that that's definitely debatable. So, we're on the right track here. But let's think about what that tells us, because it could include a lot of information. We're looking at Batman and Superman here. Man, okay, we've got comic books, cartoons, TV shows, a slew of movies, right? Are we covering all that ground? Because now we're not doing an essay anymore. That's going to be a book. If we're going to compare Batman and Superman across all those mediums, it's going to be super lengthy. So we know that's not what we're doing. We know that we're going to look at one thing in particular, right? And it turns out that we actually, when we thought of this topic, we were thinking of the early comics. Like, we weren't even really thinking of the TV shows and movies and all that stuff. So we need to go back and revise that thesis statement to reflect that. So the second version of it says, in the early editions of Batman and Superman comics, Batman's personality is more complex than Superman's. All right, so at least now we have focused a little bit more and left all that other stuff to the side, right? But, we still have a section here that has a lot of ground that could be covered. Batman and Superman, those are the superheroes, right? But they both have alter egos. So are we going to be comparing and contrasting these men in their everyday lives as well as when they're being superheroes? You know what? No, we said Batman and Superman because that's what they're known as, but in our mind, when we were coming up with the idea, we were actually thinking more of their alter egos. So we need to revise again to reflect that information. So in the early editions of Batman and Superman comics, Bruce Wayne's personality is more complex than Clark Kent's. All right, so now we're even more focused. So we're doing good at revising this. But a lot of people might stop right there, but there's still a section of this thesis statement that is really broad and could mean a lot of different things. And that's the idea of personality, and a personality being more complex. There are many facets of our personality. Are we going to be covering all of that? Are we going to be looking at every aspect of these men's personalities? If not, then what are we actually trying to get at here? What are we actually talking about when we mention one personality being more complex than the other? And this might take some free writing, and it might take some reflection and thought to really get at a way to articulate what you're really trying to get at. So once we do that, we come up with the final version of this, which says, in the early editions of Batman and Superman comics, Bruce Wayne is more pessimistic than Clark Kent. All right, so that is much more manageable. So we went from this thesis statement, which was not a total loss, it just needed to be reworked. And that kind of leads into the last main point on the first page of the handout, which is while you're writing your essay and doing all this work, that thesis statement needs to stay flexible. It is super important to the essay as a whole. It has to be there, and you want it to be as refined and strong as you can make it. But you're not necessarily gonna be able to do that right at the start. Sometimes it takes getting into the drafting, right? Especially if you're doing any kind of research, then that can evolve as through your process. So you want to have something like that first version to at least get you started with. That's what I call a working thesis statement, right? It sets you up in a place where you at least have some kind of direction that you're going in. And then as you're writing and drafting, possibly doing research, going back and making revisions, once you know exactly where the essay is headed, then you can keep coming back to that thesis statement and refining it, just like we did in that process. So you want to have something to start with, but it's not set in stone, right? Constantly keep coming back to it. And when it's all said and done, when you think that you have finished your draft, go back and look at that thesis statement one more time. Make sure it truly matches up with what you ended up doing in the body of the essay, right? It's your thesis statement, it's your essay. You get to make these decisions, totally up to you, but just make sure that it's all matching up and that it truly reflects what you've done in the draft, right? So that is essentially what a thesis statement is all about. Typically comes at the end of your introduction. It is a debatable statement that reflects your point of view on that debate. And if it's really, really good, it will also include the main points that are going to show up in the body of the essay. So if you look at the second page of the handout, you're going to see a list of different types of thesis statements. Some of them are not so good at all, and others are pretty on point. So we're going to go through some of these, not all of them. But the very first one, I put that on there just to go back to that very first point on the first page, which was that the thesis statement is a complete sentence and it should not sound like the title of your essay. That's what I mean here. We'll have some people just plop this down in the middle of their intro somewhere or right at the beginning or even set off from the intro and it just says the major problems of a teenage marriage. Well, that's not a complete sentence, first of all. And it doesn't really contain any of the other elements that a thesis statement should have. It has to be a sentence. If you look at the second option here, about 75% of all teenage marriages in the United States end in divorce. Okay, well, that is a complete sentence at least. It does have a specific topic included in it. However, it's missing one big element of a thesis statement, which is that it needs to be debatable. That sentence simply is a fact, right? You cannot argue with statistics. We could argue that people skew statistics, but as a thesis statement, that's not an argument, that's not a debate, that's a fact. So we need to figure out okay, 75% of all marriages in the United States end in divorce. Why do we even care about that fact? Where were we headed with it? What was going on in our mind when we came up with that sentence? Well, when you get to the third one, the third option here, we fleshed it out a little bit better. So this one says, when teenagers marry, they face 3 serious problems that threaten their happiness. Okay? Complete sentence. It's debatable because whatever those 3 serious problems are, in this writer's eyes, we might disagree with them, right? So it is debatable, and it's focused enough. The only thing that would have made this thesis statement even better is if they had listed those 3 serious problems. That would have made it almost perfect, which you'll see in the next round of examples. So number 4 says watching television affects our lives in many ways. All right, so we've got a complete sentence. It's not as focused as it could be because watching television, wow, there's a lot on television. Are we going to talk about all of it? So that could maybe be focused a little more. But what really makes this one faulty is this idea that watching television affects our lives in many ways. It sounds debatable. It sounds like someone could come up, and say, no, I don't think so. I don't think television affects our lives in many ways. But let's be honest here. Would anybody really disagree with this statement? Because so far it doesn't say whether or not it's a positive effect or a negative effect. It's just saying television affects our lives. I don't think anybody's really going to disagree with that. So we need to rework this one, right? Make it a little more focused and a little more of an actual debate. So our next version says the average American youngster spends between 4 and 6 hours a day watching television. Well, we got a little more focused, but we didn't get debatable. This is just a fact, right? So we need to try again. So number 6, the third version of this thesis says soap operas are popular because they entertain, inform, and help to fulfill the viewer's emotional needs. That is almost perfect. It's not just television in general anymore. We're looking specifically at soap operas. And it's not just this vague idea of how it affects our lives. We're looking at 3 specific areas. They entertain, they inform, and they help fulfill the viewer's emotional needs. By the way, those would be the 3 main points. So that's what I mean when I say that the thesis statement will list your main points and show your reader how the essay is going to be organized. Because the way this thesis statement reads, I'm expecting the first main point to show me examples that will convince me that soap operas are entertaining. And then I'm expecting the next main point to provide information and examples of how soap operas inform us. And then finally, I'm going to expect the third main point to provide examples and evidence of how they fulfill the viewer's emotional needs. So not only did the thesis statement clue me into exactly what the author was trying to prove, but it also gave me a heads up as to how the essay was going to be organized and what I was in store for, right? That's a really good thesis statement and totally debatable, absolutely focused, and definitely previews the main points in the organization of the essay. That's the kind of thesis statement we want to aim for. That might not have been what it looked like when this person first started drafting the essay, but by the time it was all said and done, that's what we ended up with. And that's really good. So you can look through those other examples there on the second page of the handout, but I want to go ahead and go to the third page of the handout, the last page, because here we have some sample introductions that I wanted to provide so that we could see a whole introduction and how the thesis statement is incorporated. So we've got this first one here. Imagine you are taking a math test, but you just cannot concentrate. What you really need is a piece of gum to chew so that you can chew on that difficult problem involving the slope equation that you cannot possibly remember. Everyone wants that refreshing piece of gum in his or her mouth during school. The controversy in schools today, however, is that students are not allowed this luxury. Students face punishment and are accused of creating a dirty school environment because of gum chewing. However, schools should allow students to chew gum because it can help students perform better on tests, it increases student concentration, and it increases student participation in class, right? So I underlined the thesis statement for you on the handout, but you can see how it took that general idea of chewing gum and then revealed what the author's actual argument is what their stance is on this argument, and then what three main points they're going to look at in the body of the essay. So very strong right there. Let's see. I'm not going to read all of them. How about number 4? We'll go to a short one. So the 4th example says, the author, Aldous Huxley, once said, "To his dog, every man is Napoleon. Hence the constant popularity of dogs. As you consider the pet you would like to have share your life, it is Huxley's quote that sums up why a dog is the best choice. Because of its sense of loyalty, its ability to protect you, and its great companionship, a dog is the perfect pet." Right? So again, started with this general idea in the beginning of the intro, worked our way down to a very focused, specific, debatable thesis statement that also previews the 3 main points from the body of the essay. So when you're doing a traditional essay, this is the kind of introduction and the kind of thesis statement you want to strive for, right? And you're going to be doing that with essay number 2 this quarter. But we're doing a different kind of essay for essay number 1. We're doing a narrative essay. So it is a formal essay, and it is one that is typically written in composition courses. But it doesn't exactly follow all the same rules and conventions that all the other academic essays follow, because you're telling a story, right? But that doesn't mean that the beginning of your story doesn't need a main point, just like every other essay does. So I want to look at the last example on the 3rd page of this handout. This introduction actually comes from a narrative essay. And you can see how all of the same concepts that we've talked about with thesis statements still apply, even though it looks a little different, but not much different. So this introduction says, "It's easy to note the behavioral dark spots in those around us. My father is a skinflint. When I need a loan or simply extra cash, he turns a deaf ear to my pleading hysterics. Mom is excessively moody. When something bothers her, she sulks for hours, never revealing what set her off, and we just have to wait until she gets over it. However, as a fairly normal teenager, I never thought of myself as having any particular character flaws. Yet, as I faced my brother Matthew at his bedroom door one spring afternoon last year, I became aware of the ugly features of anger and temper in my personality." So, thinking about, how your introduction starts off, again, kind of that funnel shape, very general in the beginning. So we start off with this story with this general idea of people having kind of character flaws, right? And then it draws us more and more to a more focused spot. And then at the end of the introduction, we get this sentence that tells us exactly what is about to unfold and why. So we know the story that's about to happen is whatever transpired when he was standing in his brother Matthew's bedroom door last spring. Something about that story, that moment, showed him the anger and temper in his personality, even though he didn't think he had any character flaws up until that point. So we know why this moment is important, and we know what it's about to reveal, and we know where it's happening and when it's happening. So in a very short amount of time, this introduction reveals a lot of information to us, and we're ready to go. Like, we know exactly what we're about to get ourselves into. The only question is what actually happens, right? The story then just fills in everything for us. So you want to remember that when we start working on the drafts for our narrative essays. I will mention it several times that you do need to have a controlling idea, a main point that is stated in your introduction, in the opening of your story. It doesn't sound like a traditional thesis statements like all the other ones have on this handout, but it's still there, right? So Everything about the thesis statements is just so important, right? The success of the essay truly hinges on how strong and clear your thesis statement is. So what I want you to do now, so you've read over the PowerPoint and the handout, you've watched this video, you'll notice that the next sub-tab is a graded exercise on thesis statements. So go ahead and do that exercise, and once you're finished, move on to the next set of sub-tabs, which is about introductions and conclusions. So you'll read through a couple more handouts, and then there'll be another video lesson. But if you have any questions about the thesis statements, please let me know, because I want to make sure everybody understands what they are, why they're important, and how to start crafting them, which is what the graded exercise is designed to do. So good luck with it, and let me know if you have any problems with it.